on the topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J Loren Norris.
You know, it's pretty ironic. I heard Ron White say one time as he was being arrested. Now, I'm just guessing this is just a comedy routine. It's not part of his actual real life. But he talks about how as they were taking him out of the bar to put him in his special ride home, he kept talking to them. And the officer said to him several times, "You have the right to remain silent." He said, "I knew I had the right to remain silent. I just didn't have the ability." I knew I had the right to remain silent. I just didn't have the ability. I wonder if there are leaders who find themselves sometimes talking themselves into trouble rather than out of trouble. They think they're talking themselves out of trouble, but the things that they say betray them more than they would ever acknowledge. That's what I want to talk about today on Leading Leaders.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and I know that as a kid growing up, I used to talk myself into trouble all the time. Not intentionally. I just, I have this problem. I'm talking and I can't shut up. Yeah, my sister actually bought that shirt for me one time. I don't wear it very often. But the idea that we sometimes think that by lots of communication we can get ourselves out of trouble, or lots of communication we can keep ourselves out of trouble, and well, it's just not true. What is true, however, is that we can often say things that we don't think are a problem, and yet somebody else considers them a problem. Maybe right now it's not a problem, but 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 25 years from now, because we do have the Wayback Machine, it will become a problem. There are a whole lot of things right now that they're taboo in society. Phrases, ideologies, impressions, intentions that 2 years ago, they weren't a problem. Nobody would have cared if you said that. Nobody would have thought twice about it. But today it can get you canceled. Things that you might have said 10 years ago, they'll get you fired on the spot or might even result in a lawsuit. Things you said 25 years ago when you were in middle school or elementary or high school, those things come back to haunt you because they're indicative of your character. Now, there's a double-edged sword here. If you're a person who's outspoken and always has been outspoken, then what you have to say is probably indicative of who you really are. It's a strong impression. If you're a good somebody, that's not a bad thing. But if you're a bad somebody, trust me, the words you say will reveal who you really are. The stories that you tell will expose who you really are. And especially those stories, like the old pineapple, what comes out of you when you're under pressure, that's what's really inside. When you're under the pressure of an interview, a media has a camera in your face and a microphone in your face, and they're asking you questions that seem like nothing kind of questions, but you can't help from trying to defend yourself or answer questions that they haven't asked, and you put your foot in your mouth, or both feet, all the way up to the knee. And you realize later, if I'd said nothing, I wouldn't have anything to defend. Or I was only telling the truth, but they spun it in a different way. That's a common thing these days in job interviews. It's a common thing in personnel reviews. It's a common thing in media interviews. It happens all the time that people find themselves in a conversation, and by trying to talk themselves out of trouble, they actually talk themselves more into trouble. Now, there's an art form to leading the narrative when it comes to an interrogation or a question. You have the right to remain silent, and sometimes the best thing you can do is remain silent. In fact, It's been a while since I shared it, but I shared a video of an attorney who was speaking to a bunch of attorneys and law enforcement people, and there were judges even in the room. And as an attorney, what he exposed was how an interrogation process, it's not just a bunch of questions they're asking. They're intentionally asking those questions in a specific order for the purpose of causing you to reveal something you would have never said otherwise. That interrogation process breaks down the psyche of the person being interrogated until they've told something they would have never told in a million years if you just ask them directly. You ask them silly, inane questions, questions that they would think, who cares if they know that? Of course I'll tell them that, because the more answers I give them, the more honest I seem. Unfortunately, that question by itself is a setup. Because later they're going to come back and ask you, well, you said this, can you be more specific about that? And all they're doing is picking apart the answer you already gave them. Employers do it. Media does it. Law enforcement does it. They will use your own words against you. That's why they say you have the right to remain silent, because anything you can and do say will be used against you in a court of law. They never say that what's going to be said by you will be used to exonerate you. No, that's not what they're looking for. If they're questioning you, if they're interrogating you, if they're interviewing you, if it's a casual conversation they're having with you, there's a reason for it, and they intend to trap you and prosecute you. They're not having this conversation because they were bored. Understand that that same form of interrogation is now being applied on all kinds of levels. It's being used in social media. Maybe you've seen this new thing out. There was a nice little video about it yesterday called deep fakes. It's been around for a while. Since Obama was president, they've actually had deep fakes of Obama where the AI, the software, measures the way he moves his face when he talks. And the more video there is like this of me talking, the easier it is for them to fake the way that I move my mouth when I talk, the words that I choose to say, my vocabulary, my intonations, my speech pace, and duplicate all of those things with a digital reenactment of somebody else doing it. Which means they could make you say or do anything, whether you would actually say or do it or not. Now, herein lies that double-edged sword. If there's a whole lot of history of you saying things that you truly believe, there's a whole lot of history of you expressing your deepest thoughts and concerns and ideologies, and that deep history is pretty consistent about what you believe and who you are and the kinds of things that you would say, then it's going to be really hard to deep fake you saying something entirely different. On the other hand, if you've always been kind of the waffler who's on one side today and another side tomorrow, you have this opinion on Monday and a different opinion on Friday, well, then that's going to be a challenge, because you could be found to have said anything and it would be believable, because in the past you've said anything, whatever seemed expedient in the moment. See, the challenge for a leader, if you don't have that consistency, that common value, that common core value that you hold on to, where people can say, well, the core values of this individual. So here's just an example. If somebody were to say to me, how many times in your life have you been intoxicated? There's zero question about the answer to that question. It's not ambiguous. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to contemplate how many times I have been intoxicated or under the influence of any kind of substance, because I don't do that. I've never been drunk in my life, period. Not once, kinda, not a couple of times, maybe 3, 0, zip zilch, not of it, never been intoxicated. Never been intoxicated. Now, that is a very specific question. But there are other questions that could kind of point to that or poke to that. Have you ever had alcohol? Have you ever been have you ever had maybe a little too much at a party? No, 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 and no, and no. Because they're all related to each other. And in my life, that's an absolute. It just always has been. So for 50 plus years of my life, the number of times that I've been intoxicated are 0. That's a very definitive answer. There are other people who would say, well, I don't get drunk that often. Great. How many times? I don't know. 3, 4, 5, 10. And if you give them the answer of 5, and then they find out it's 6, you're a liar. See, the challenge that many people have is that they don't recall the things that to them seem unimportant. Leaders do the same thing. How many people have you hired in the last year? I don't know. I'd have to look back at my HR records. Oh, okay. How many people have you fired in the last year? Again, I'd have to look back at the records. I don't know the answer to that question. How many people have you fired for this cause? Again, I just don't know. So you can't tell me if you hired or fired this particular person for this particular reason. Well, now the leader's in a pickle because the leader's got a very specific question that has a very ambiguous answer, and it may or may not be true. But it's a question of integrity. It's a question of interrogation. And it's a question that, remember, can and will be used against you, not for you, in a court of law. As a leader, you've got to be wise enough to understand that in every conversation, every interview, whether it's an employee that you're potentially interviewing, an HR person who's just asking basic questions, an outside interrogator like an inspector general or someone from the board, or it's answering to your boss or to the media or to a marketing firm. Every conversation you have will one day be used against you in some manner. The ability to be measured in what you say, the ability to clearly understand and articulate what you believe, what you're going to apply, what you've done in the past, is an absolute imperative for leaders. And in these days, if you hadn't noticed, we have some trials and some committees and some conversations taking place whose only purpose it is to catch you in a trap. The only agenda they have is to find a way to make you guilty of something. They're looking for specific kinds of leaders who have specific kinds of worldviews and operate in specific circles, but if they find that you're one of them, they will come after you with everything they have. And they will ask questions that seem, who cares if you know the answer to that question, kind of questions. But those questions will lead to another question. There was a gentleman who had a great reputation, had a great, successful, long, productive career, who was asked a bunch of questions by a couple of different people, and at one point gave a different answer. In fact, there was one specific question to which the answer was 3, and found out the answer was really 10. Now, the question was irrelevant. What was actually being counted, whether it was 3 or 10, was kind of mundane. But the fact that the answer was different on 2 different occasions, one time it was 10, one time it was 3, and the 10 was provable, made the 3 a lie. And the sentence was based on that lie, that misrepresentation. That one question, that one word caught up this person with a long relationship and a long reputation and a long career. One word in one answer after 1,000 questions. How solid are you as a leader and a communicator to maintain the integrity, to say, this is what I would have always said, this is the same answer? I don't care how many times you interrogate me about how many times I have been intoxicated, the answer remains the same. There's no question on it. I've never had to lie about it because it has never changed. The answer is 0. It has always been 0. It will always be 0. It's just not something I do. I don't care. That reality gives me some surety in that question. Now, if you were to say, have you ever driven tired? Well, yeah. How many times? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. See, that's where you find yourself in trouble. And I'm challenging you as a leader right now to ask yourself, have I ever thought through the kinds of questions I might be asked if somebody were trying to catch me to put me in trouble? If they were trying to manipulate me in something that I said, what are some of the areas where I'm vulnerable that I've never really thought through that? I want you to take the time as a leader to ask yourself those questions, because there are people who will ask questions of you. Again, a job interview, an interrogation, a media interview, a chance to sit in front of the news cameras, what looks like a great PR opportunity or marketing opportunity for you. But just being in front of that camera, the questions they're going to ask you, they're leading the narrative by asking those questions. If you want to lead the narrative in your own life, you've got to lead the narrative by the answers you provide. And you better be consistent with those answers. They better be the same answers about the same topics and the same subjects every time. And if you haven't taken the time to reflect on what those answers might be, to rehearse the stories in your head, to walk through those details, and maybe even pull out an old journal and go, okay, well, I hadn't thought about it like that. Let me look at that again. Let me look back at my social media and see what I've said about that in the past. Let me go back and review the conversations that maybe have been recorded and ask myself, have I left myself open to something there? And after you've done all that, then you can ask yourself the question, can I lead the narrative with the answers that I provide? You better have the wisdom to know that every question can and will be used against you. Very seldom will they be used on your benefit. And as a leader, you've got to have the wisdom to know how to hold yourself and lead the narrative in a nefarious conversation. And by that I mean a conversation which is being brought to you by someone who has only one intent, and that is to undermine you, your authority, and your leadership. You better prepare yourself now. Those days are coming. And as those days come closer, the closer we get to the days where everybody will be questioning their authority and anybody can be faked, you will find yourself guilty of saying things that you never said. Or find yourself guilty for having said things that you would still stand beside. It wasn't a crime then, but perhaps it is now. Maybe you need to go back and read about the archipelago. Yeah, that's some tough stuff. But history tends to repeat itself. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.